All right, let's talk about debt. Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful idea from an economist named Minsky. And trust me, it's going to completely change how you look at debt and financial stability. So let's just jump right in with a big question. Is all debt created equal? I mean, think about it. Is $1 million of debt for a super profitable, stable company the same as $1 million for, say, a brand new startup that's still figuring things out? Minsky's whole point was no way, not even close. So how do you figure out the real risk of debt? Well, Minsky came up with this super simple but honestly brilliant way to look at it. He said, forget just looking at the total amount of debt. The real question is, can the borrower actually cover their payments with the cash they're bringing in? That's the core comparison. Okay, so the most important piece of this puzzle is something Minsky called Cobros nettos. We'll just call it net cash flow to keep it simple. All it means is the cash you get from your business minus the cash you have to spend just to keep the lights on, operating costs. Crucially, this is the money you have before you make any debt payments. And right there, that's the whole game. Minsky's entire idea, his whole framework, boils down to comparing just two things, that net cash flow we just talked about versus the debt payments you have to make. That's it. That simple relationship, that one comparison, tells you almost everything. And once you make that comparison, you can sort pretty much any debt into one of three buckets. Each one has its own personality, its own level of risk. Minsky called them hedge, speculative, and Ponzi. All right, so this table really puts it all together in one place. You can see how that simple cash flow versus payments relationship defines everything. And notice those two words, solvency and liquidity. They're key. Solvency is like, hey, in the long run, do I have enough stuff to pay off my debts? But liquidity is about the here and now. Do I have the actual cash to make my payment this month? As you can see, we go from super safe and stable all the way down to incredibly fragile. Let's dig into each one. Okay, first up, we've got hedge financing. This is the good stuff. Think of it as the gold standard of borrowing. You're in a hedge position when the cash your business is generating is consistently and comfortably bigger than your debt payments. We're talking principal and interest, the whole shebang. Yeah, if you're in a hedge position, you're on solid rock. Minsky even talked about having a margin of safety. It's not enough to just cover your payments. You need enough of a cash cushion to handle a bad month or a sudden dip in sales without breaking a sweat. You're both solvent and liquid. You're safe. All right, now let's move into shakier territory. Speculative financing. The name kind of gives it away, right? This is where things start to get a little dicey. In this situation, for at least some of the time, your cash flow from the business isn't enough to cover your full debt payment. So this borrower might still be solvent. They might have valuable assets, but they've got a major cash problem right now. They're illiquid. So what do? They have to roll over their debt, which is just a fancy way of saying they borrow new money to pay back the old money. They are speculating that they'll always be able to find a new lender. It's a bet, and their survival literally depends on winning that bet every single time. And that brings us to the final and most dangerous category, Ponzi financing. And yeah, it's named after that famous scheme for a very, very good reason. We're now in the financial red zone. The situation is pretty dire. So someone in a Ponzi position isn't making enough cash to even cover the interest on their debt. Forget the principal. So what happens? Their total debt just keeps getting bigger and bigger just to pay the interest on the old debt. It's a total house of cards. The only way they can survive is if the value of their assets skyrockets and they can sell them off to someone else at an inflated price. They're basically praying for a bubble. Okay, but here's where Minsky's idea gets really powerful. This is the part that helps explain entire economic booms and busts. The key takeaway is that these categories, hedge, speculative, Ponzi, they aren't set in stone. A company or a person can move between them as things change. And it's super easy to see how a perfectly safe borrower can get into trouble. Let's say you have a solid hedge company, but then a recession hits and their sales tank. All of a sudden, their net cash flow drops. Or maybe they get a little too confident and take on a massive new loan for a big expansion. Either way, their debt payments now outweigh their cash flow. And boom, just like that, they've slid from hedge right into speculative. And the fall from speculative to Ponzi can be even faster and scarier. Remember that speculative borrower who needs to keep rolling over their debt? Well, what happens if the central bank raises interest rates? Suddenly, their new loans are way more expensive. Their debt payments explode. If that happens at the same time their business slows down, now they can't even cover the interest. They've just fallen into the Ponzi trap. But listen, it's not all doom and gloom. This isn't just a slippery slope down to disaster. The great thing is this whole system can work in reverse. You can climb back up the ladder towards safety. So, that speculative borrower, if they land a huge new contract and their cash flow surges, they can graduate back up to being a hedge borrower. Even someone in a Ponzi situation could get a lifeline. If interest rates plummet and they can refinance their debt super cheap, they might be able to at least cover the interest again, moving them back into the speculative box. It's all about fixing that core ratio, getting cash flow up and debt payments down. So, let's bring this all home. What's the big lesson here? What's the point of knowing about these three phases of debt? Why does this framework actually matter? Here's the bottom line. Financial stability is not a fixed thing. It's a moving target. A loan's health, its safety, isn't permanent. It all depends on what's happening in the economy right now. A loan that looks like solid gold, totally hedged today, could turn into a risky speculative bet or even a Ponzi situation tomorrow if the world changes. And that's really the final thought to leave you with. Minsky's framework gives you a totally new lens, a new way to look at the debt all around you, whether it's a huge corporation, the government, or even your own mortgage. It forces you to ask a better question, not just how much debt do they have, but the much, much more important question, how are they actually paying for it? And that question, well, that gets you a whole lot closer to understanding what's really going on.